When you read the Bible, do you ever get the feeling there's something more going on beneath the surface? Like the stories aren't just random history. Well, what if I told you that the lives of some of the most important prophets, like Jacob, Moses, and even Jesus, weren't random at all? What if they were following a precise, repeating formula, a kind of divine blueprint for salvation, hidden in plain sight? Today, we're going to dive in and try to decode that very idea.
And this quote from the book of Amos kind of sets the stage for us perfectly. It says, God reveals his secrets to the prophets. And the source material we're digging into today argues that one of the biggest secrets isn't just a one-time event, but a recurring pattern. It's this idea of a model course for salvation that just keeps showing up.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll break down what this secret blueprint even is. Then, we'll look at the prophetic pattern it created. We'll see how Jesus was supposed to follow that model. And then, this is the crucial part, we'll explore the pattern of failure that emerged. And finally, we'll ask what all this means for the blueprint's next chapter. Okay, let's jump right into section 1. To understand any of this, we first have to get our heads around the central concept from our source material. It's a divine plan called the Providence of Restoration. And you can think of this as the engine that's driving this entire pattern we're talking about. So, what does that mean, Providence of Restoration? Well, in a nutshell, the goal is to restore humanity back to its original unfallen state, to fix what was broken way back in the beginning. But here's the catch. According to this theology, it's not all on God. Humans have a huge part to play. You've got to remember that phrase, human responsibility. Seriously, keep it in the back of your mind because it is absolutely crucial to understanding everything else. So the big question is, how does God actually teach people how to fulfill this responsibility? Does he just throw them in the deep end? Well, the argument here is no, not at all. He didn't leave it to chance. He created a kind of symbolic model course, a template, if you will, through the life of one very specific person, Jacob. And this is where it starts to get really interesting. Check this out. Jacob's life is presented as the first symbolic run-through, kind of like a rehearsal. Then hundreds of years later, Moses comes along and basically replays that exact same course, but on a much bigger national scale. The source calls this an image course. And the parallels are just, wow. Both men face these intense, life-threatening trials. Both have a connection to the number 12, Jacob with his sons, Moses with the tribes, and both are leading a journey out of what this framework calls a satanic world, basically a fallen world, and heading toward Canaan, the promised land. Okay, so we have Jacob's symbolic course and Moses's image course. And all of this, according to the source, was leading up to one person, Jesus. The whole idea is that he was meant to walk the same path, to follow the same blueprint, but this time, to fulfill it in a real, substantial way, on a global scale. All right, this table really lays it all out. This is the core of the argument. When you put these three figures side by side, the pattern just jumps out at you. I mean, look at this. A life-threatening trial, Jacob wrestling the angel, God trying to kill Moses, Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness. Check. 12 key followers, Jacob's 12 sons, Moses' 12 tribes, Jesus' 12 disciples. Check. A symbolic staff or rod? Yep, all three have one. And get this, even a critical 3-day period of separation shows up in all three of their stories. It's uncanny. Jacob, Moses, Jesus, it's like they're all reading from the same script. So it all seems pretty perfect, right? Like a foolproof plan set up by God, but, and this is a huge but, that leads to a really obvious and difficult question. If the divine blueprint was so clear, so perfect, why didn't it work? Why did the story end with a crucifixion instead of the kingdom of heaven on earth? Yeah, let's just put it out there. What went wrong? This is where the whole narrative takes a sharp turn, because the success of this divine plan wasn't guaranteed. It wasn't just up to God, and it wasn't even solely up to the central figure. And here it is. This is the answer our source gives us. Remember what I said to keep in mind? Human responsibility. The entire plan hinged on whether or not people would fulfill their part, their choices, their faith, or lack of it. That was the wild card. That was the variable that could throw a wrench in the whole divine machine. The story of Moses and the Israelites is basically Exhibit A for this whole concept. Their mission to get to Canaan failed not once, but multiple times, all because the people just didn't trust Moses. They kept rebelling. And that's how a journey that should have taken like 21 days turned into a 40-year ordeal in the desert. But the biggest setback, the one that had ripple effects for centuries, came from a mistake made by Moses himself. Okay, picture this. They've been wandering for 40 years. The people are thirsty, they're losing faith again. So God gives Moses a really simple command to prove his power and give them water. He says, just strike the rock. Once. But Moses is frustrated. He's angry with the people. And in that moment of anger, he strikes the rock twice. Now, according to this framework, this wasn't just a small mistake. It was a monumental error with huge spiritual consequences. Here's why. The theology here sees the rock as a symbol for Jesus. Striking it once was meant to symbolize salvation flowing from Christ. But striking it a second time? Well, that's seen as creating a spiritual condition, a kind of precedent that would allow Satan to strike Jesus later on, if and only if the people around Jesus also lost faith. And that, tragically, is exactly what happened. The pattern of failure just repeated itself. This framework argues that the same kind of disbelief that plagued Moses' time showed up again in Jesus' time. It says that when John the Baptist, who was in a position similar to Moses, began to doubt Jesus, it created a massive stumbling block. It essentially blocked the path for a whole lot of people to accept him. And it was this collective failure, this breakdown of human responsibility, that ultimately paved the way for the crucifixion. But hold on, the crucifixion wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. It actually accomplished something absolutely vital. But, and here we go with the buts again, it also left a huge part of the original mission completely unfinished. So what we're looking at here is basically the state of salvation after the cross. The crucifixion and resurrection are seen as a partial victory, a huge one for sure. Through it, Jesus achieved spiritual salvation for all of humanity. That part is 100% complete. But the other half of the equation, the physical salvation, the actual establishment of a real kingdom of heaven on earth, well, that part was left undone. And this all leads to a pretty stunning conclusion if you follow the logic. If God's blueprint is real, if it's an absolute plan, and if it was left unfinished the first time around, then it has to be completed. It's just a matter of when. So this theological framework basically asserts that the existence of the pattern itself demands a second advent. Someone has to come back and finish the job. Which leaves us with this one final, really powerful question to think about. If history really is a repeating blueprint, a divine formula playing out over and over, and if the last chapter ended on a massive cliffhanger, then what does the next page hold? What comes next for humanity? It's a pretty wild thought, and it kind of challenges everything we think we know about the past, and especially the future.